Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is how did you become the first teenager to deadlift 700 pounds?
Oh yeah, yeah. You want to start with that one? That's the
I want to
fun
start
one.
with that one. That's the
Yeah,
one.
yeah. So it was really interesting. So well, I guess I can kind of start with just how I started lifting because
Yeah.
it like at first I got good at deadlifting by accident and then it became on purpose. So I remember when I was in sixth grade, they typically had track team for seventh and eighth graders, but they needed a few more mile runners. So they asked sixth graders to join. So me and my buddy joined, and I mean, we weren't very good. Like by the end of the season, I think we ran like a 720 mile. Like it was all right. I mean, but no one, we're never going to win. And, but there were two guys that were in eighth grade, and one was Keelan Hyde, and the other one was Drake Parker. And bro, they just had like the genetics. They were jacked and they had six packs and they were fast, real fast. And it was crazy. And I remember looking at them and being like, oh man, I want that. Like, I want to look like Drake Parker. And funny enough, I actually later on inspired him to join powerlifting, and now he powerlifts. So it's like he inspired me, and then I inspired him. So it's kind of fun. But I knew I was going to get into the gym because I had to look like that, but I didn't know how to do it or anything like that. So, but I was too young to join the gym. So eighth grade came around, and I finally got to join the gym that summer because my neighbor um, so my neighbor, and then he had a son, and him and I were like relatively close to the same age, but we'd hang out a lot. And his dad had mentioned the gym, and I'm like, oh yeah, gym, gym, gym. And then Connor was like, yeah, gym. And so we started going in the summer, and we would do just a rotation around the machines. Like the dad just used to go do football training and stuff, so we would go do that. And then I saw a guy in there. His name was Charlie, and Charlie was like 6'2", like big blonde hair guy, real muscular. And I remember one day I was watching him deadlift 405, and I was like, training with my neighbor was cool, but like I want to train with Charlie. So I started. I asked Charlie if I could train with him, and he's like, yeah, he was a senior in high school at the time. And so that was like, I was kind of rolling into ninth grade at that point. He would pick me up, we would go to the gym and train, and then sometimes we'd go eat. After that, we'd go get some sandwiches, and then he dropped me off at home. And it was kind of a burden to him, but he was still willing to do it. And I wasn't gonna, I was gonna take what I could get. So we trained for a little while, and honestly didn't really have much promising aspects about my lifting, but I just lifted wrong. I didn't do anything well. And his training was kind of silly looking back at it. And I actually later ended up doing his training too. This is kind of funny. Um, and so at that point,
Train everything. This guy just trains everything.
I know, right? And then at that point, like 6 months later, I just kind of it was so. Like I wasn't really into it. I wasn't seeing the results I wanted. Like I wasn't getting enough protein. Like I wasn't doing the inputs that I needed. I just didn't know it. So I started playing tennis, and I got really obsessed with tennis. It was like spring of my freshman year. I started like ninth on the team, and I climbed my way up to second on the team. And I could have gave the first one a really good run for their money. He was a junior, and I played so much that I got tendonitis in my wrist so bad because I went from no tennis to 3, 4 hours a day of tennis every day. And I
That's
didn't know anything
legit
about,
tennis elbow.
huh? No, I got it on my wrist.
I
My
mean,
elbows felt great. Elbows have always been good. And so it ended up like I was kind of like, well, if I can't play all the time, I'm not gonna play at all. And because I didn't know how to rehab or anything like that. So I was like, well, what am I gonna do now? And I was like, I'm gonna go back to the gym. So I went back to the gym, and there was one bodybuilder in our town. His name was Greg. We had a town of 20,000 people, and Greg was like 180 shredded, kind of short guy. Um, I walked up to him because I wasn't gonna play around this time. Last time I didn't get results. I wanted results this time, so I knew I needed to figure it out. So I said, Greg, man, I want to train with you. I said, I'm gonna eat like you, I'm gonna sleep like you, I'm gonna train with you. I said, I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions, but I'm never gonna ask the same question twice. And I was like this like 140-pound kid, and he laughed at me. I'm like, you motherfucker. And I was like, I'm training with you. And I was like, just you'll see, just let me do it. So
how
he
old were you?
finally like I was still 14,
You're still
and
14.
it was like the end of my freshman year, and I was just persistent. And finally he was like, whatever, okay. So I started training with him, bro. And I had just this fire in me. Every time he hit anything, I was like, I'm trying to beat it. I'm like, I'm trying to clobber on this dude. I'm trying to train harder than him. I'm trying to act like nothing's hard. I'm giving it my all. And I'm like asking about food stuff. So I start eating just tons of chicken. See, at this time, like I was just kind of learning how to cook. So I'd cook this like just bland chicken. I wouldn't do it didn't even have seasoning on it.
Yeah,
I literally cooked
14-year-old chicken.
chicken, no seasoning, and I'd eat it. And I'd be like, well, I kind of need some vegetables in here too. So I'd get like a can of peas and just pour out a whole can of peas on my plate and eat it. It was silly. But but within like 6 months, so when I first started like around this time and I started deadlifting again, I remember I like first day was like 225 or something like that. And I remember the guy, I think it was actually Drake Parker, the original guy I talked about on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
track team, was like, hey bro, your back's kind of like that when you're doing it. So you
Yeah, it
just
looked
need to
like a
straighten it
cat.
out.
The cat
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like this. And I straightened out and did it. And he's like, no, it's perfect. I was like, okay, cool. And then I kept deadlifting, and then it just started going up, bro. I was like 1, 2 months in, I was hitting like 315 for 5. And then it
How
like
much
went
did
into
you
the four.
weigh?
I was like 160. I was gaining weight rapidly. I was gaining, bro, I was bulking
Is this
hard.
when you were in the peanut butter chocolate milk bulk?
No, that came later.
Oh,
That
okay.
came after I
We'll
switched to
talk
powerlifting.
about
Yeah.
that in a little
That
bit.
was when I got around the powerlifting influencers.
Well,
And
that
but at
we'll
the
get
time,
there.
but at the time, I was just yeah, I just started like I really liked the deadlift. So I was like, Rick, can we deadlift today? And he's like, nah, because he'd be like, nah, we might do Smith machine deadlifts, my
Yeah.
back. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll just deadlift after we're done training. So I just start doing it. And then I would just max every week. Like, what can I hit? And it would just go up every time I maxed out on deadlift. It didn't matter if it was literally the next day I PR'd. And I just kept going. I was like, what is going on? And I was 15 at this point, going to my sophomore year, and I was pulling like 525. And
This,
I was like, I can pull stuff because I remember hitting 4 plates with school, but 5 plates, it just weren't strong people around. So 5 plates was a big deal, like where I was, because no one else could do it.
yeah.
And there were other people in high school, the juniors and seniors, that had already started lifting. One of the guys was Christian Kauser. And Christian Kauser would come in every day for 2 hours and do the same routine 6 days a week, 2 hours a day, same thing. Monday, same thing, 2 hours a day. Tuesday, 2 hours, same thing. And it was hilarious. But he was actually pretty big, but
Yeah.
it was more of his genetics than his training capabilities. And I told him, I said, I'm gonna out deadlift you. And he laughed at me. And I said, all right, well, we're gonna face off each week on deadlift, and I'm gonna beat you. And I was like coming for him. And I remember the day that he tried to pull something and he couldn't get it, and I eked it out. And and, and he was like, fuck, he beat me. And then after that, bro, I just clobbered on. And then I was like, I'm coming for you on bench press. And he laughed at me. And I was like, I was like, you're about to learn your lesson. And I beat him on bench press too. But around that time, like, so I was like, competing with all the older high school guys. I was training with Greg. And then my cousin actually used to compete in powerlifting. He was like, hey, you should go try powerlifting because you're probably pretty good at it. So I was telling my dad about it, and I was like, can we just go watch a powerlifting meet? And he said, sure. And so we drove like 3 hours. I was still 15 to Manchester, Tennessee. And the powerlifting meet was in a hotel ballroom, which is common. And I walk in there and I'm like, it's so foreign to me. I don't understand how it's going. I'm kind of bored. It's just, powerlifting meets aren't that entertaining to go to unless you get like crazy big lifters. And I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna sit in the warm-up room because the warm-up room was more entertaining. And there was this guy, he was like 6'2", huge. And he had the thing, you see it sometimes with deadlifters where they just do the grip and rip. They just go down, grab it, and come back up, and they don't even set their hands, they
Don't
just
brace
grab
or
it. They don't even look at it. It's like, how do you even know you're grabbing the bar? And you just go for it. And he was doing it, and he was pulling all the way up through 585, just crazy fast, explosive, didn't even look hard. He ended up pulling like sevens or something like that. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that really bad. And I got back. So I started looking up, stuff about powerlifting. And my cousin told me about some of his old friends that were still into powerlifting. And I said, hey, you know, what should I do programming wise? And they're like, well, we follow the cube method with Brandon Lilly. I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna do the cube method. So I ended up like following Brandon Lilly online and following his cube method. And then he put out a thing about coaching. And back then online coaching was kind of cheap. It was only like 100 a month. So I signed up for it. So I started getting coaching by him. And then later on, I ended up like Dan Green at the time was a really great power lifter. He was real lean and I liked what he was up to. So I figured out who his nutrition people were. And it turns out it was Renaissance Periodization. They're huge now, but they didn't have much of a media presence online earlier at the time. So I ended up working with them. So I had a coach and a nutritionist, and I was like, I want to compete in powerlifting. And I was just going hard in the paint on deadlifting and bulking. And I was gaining, bro, like
Yeah, you gained like 100 pounds in a year, right?
it probably was a little longer than a year, but I did go from 140 to 240 fast.
Tell
And
everybody what your diet was when you did that.
yeah. So in powerlifting at the time, the whole idea was the bigger you are, the strong you are. No one really talked about body fat percentage. It was just if you wanted to lift weights like a 275 weight class guy, you should be in the 275 weight class. So I was just I was like
Yeah, you
I was
just
like
went for it.
the heaviest weight classes lift the most weight. So therefore I should be in the biggest weight
It's
class.
just totals. It's just totals. You're just like
Yeah.
if I want a 2,000 pound total, like I just
I
need
just got
to
to get bigger.
I
I just got
just
to
need
get
to be
bigger.
big.
And I just didn't know, bro. I mean, I look now and I'm like, was that really that dumb? And I mean, the answer is yes. But I mean, it was so silly. But I ended up at 16, I reached my heaviest at 240 and I pulled, was that 17 yet? It was still, I think I was still 16. I pulled like 675 and I was just fat. But I could squat like probably like 620s and then bench 365, something like that. And at that point,
That's
I had another, yeah.
yeah, that's crazy.
And then I had another nutritionist reach out to me, which I ended up he looked like a Viking. He had a huge beard. And I was like, who is this guy? He literally cold DM me about like if my nutrition was taken care of. And I asked another guy who was like another well-known coach what he thought of this other dude. I was like, this guy messaged me. Like, who is he? And he said, he messaged you? Oh, you do what he says. You do what he says. And I go, oh, okay. So I signed up with him. And he was kind of like in a nice way. It was like, bro, you're fat. We need to fix that. So when I was 17 years old, I worked my way down from 240 down to 215. And then I increased my deadlift like another 50 pounds and probably added like 150, 200 pounds to my total. And that's when at 17, I competed in a meet and I squatted 625 in sleeves. I I could have crushed 650 or 675 that day. It moved great, but that's just what my last attempt was 625. And then bench was like so. I benched 390 pause, which my best ever touch and go was 425. So, something like that as far as like how good it was. And then on deadlift, I pulled 705 or 710 pretty quick. And I was like, what should I put on the bar? And they were like, Brandon Lilly was there and he said 735. And I go, all right. And I pulled it and I got up to where like I was almost at lockout and bro, it just didn't want to lock out. I'm like, I'm locking it out. So I'm just sitting there just grinding. And the bar has just the slightest downward motion. And then I lock it out and I put it down and I got two red lights and a white light. And the
Oh,
guy who gave me a white light had a bigger total, and the guys who gave me red lights had smaller totals than me. And I was just in my mind at the time, I was like, I hit that. I
yeah.
hit it. I'm like, I don't care if it didn't count to me. It doesn't even matter to me. I pulled 735. I locked that crap out. Like it was details at that point. It just didn't matter. Now I wouldn't claim that as like my powerlifting total because it was red lights in the meet, but to me, that's my PR. And after that, I ended up keep working my way down in weight till I was like 178. And that was 19. I actually tripled 675, weighing 178.
At 178, you tripled 675. That's
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah. And then I just the power lift or the phase that I had to do to pull 675 for three burnt me out of powerlifting where I never touched it again.
How long
It
ago
was
was
too
that?
hard.
How many years ago
Do
was that?
what? I was when I was 19, so about 8 years ago.
Oh, wow. So that was the last time you
So
powerlifted was when you were 19?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not the last time I like deadlifted, but it was the
Well,
last time I trained for powerlifting. Yeah, the training was really interesting. So I at that time I'd worked with some other trainers, but with Brandon Lilly again, and he had a new kind of thing he wanted to try out, and I was basically like, yeah, I'll do it. So the idea was you would do a deadlift set, and then and it ended up being like 10 to 12 total sets of deadlift. And you would do a set and you set a timer for 1 minute. And as soon as it hit 60 seconds, you would do another set. So I was doing like 10 to 12 sets of with weights over 500. And some of them were variations of like snatch grip and deficit. Everything was pulled off a deficit. You wouldn't even let me pull off the ground. And I would get all of that done. I would get like the 10, 12 sets done in like 25 minutes.
bro, it's stupid. And
And I got,
was it all
do
triples?
what? Anywhere from 3 to 5, typically.
Crazy.
And I got decimated. I remember I got so fatigued that one day I came into the gym for the training session and I failed 405.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, it took like 40% off my max. And I remember being like, Brandon is not working, bro. And he said, you just wait. You just keep doing it. You'll adapt. Your body will figure it out. I'm like, man, I don't think so. He's like, just do it. And then like 6 weeks later, I pulled 675 for three. And I still to this day, it's funny because people talk about like, science this, science that, like this is what studies show. Here's all the justifications and the physiological reasons why this is the best way to train. But some of my craziest PRs were hit from doing stuff that broke all the rules. But it was just so different from what I was used to that my body just adapted great to it. My best ever bench pressing was like if anyone knows what Smolov is for squat, where basically you squat all the time, but it was kind of like some version of one of the Smolovs where on I'd actually just hurt my hamstring. So I was like, well, we'll just focus on bench. And on Monday, I would do 7 sets of 5. And then on Wednesday, I did 8 sets of 4. And then on Friday, I did 10 sets of 3. And then on Saturday, I would like overhead press.
Yeah.
And I did that for 6 weeks, and my bench press exploded. I got so good at bench press. I felt towards the end, it's something like it was a short term thing because my pec felt like it was about to rip off the bone, so I had to chill. But it was just insane. But like most of the time, if you look at some kind of volume like that, you're like, that breaks the rules. You shouldn't do that. Like my bench press volume alone was something like 25,000 pounds a week or something like that. It was absurd, but it
Stupid.
worked. It
Yeah.
worked. And if I benched like one time a week, my bench would go down. If I benched twice a week, it would stay the same. If I benched 3 times a week, it'd go up.
Yeah.
So it was funny how like just different stuff I would try, people would say like, that wouldn't work. And I'm like, I don't know, man. It worked for me.
I think it has a lot to do with like work capacity too and things like that. And just like literally like doing a workup for your body. Cause I've noticed the same things with training where it's like there's a lot of people that swear they're Mike Menzer and they're like, yeah, dude, like if I just do one set really hard, like I'm gonna, have awesome hypertrophy and awesome strength gains. And I'm like so much of lifting and so much of like mind muscle connection and strength and all of this stuff is neural and it's a skill set within itself. So it's like just because Mike Menzer could do that doesn't mean you can. Most people, the reality is that 2 time a week range is probably maintenance, maybe slight gain if you're a newbie. But like anytime I've really wanted to push a number, like I do have to get into 3 times a week. Like I just had
Yeah.
to, whether it was deadlift. I've never gone hard on bench ever. Like I've never done a cycle where I'm like, let's try to get my bench up. But squat and deadlift, I've always had to go to 3 times a week. And it obviously one was like the main variation, like straight up back squat. And then there was, 2 variations per week as well. But like
Mhm.
people, especially now, I think it's like trendy to be like, well, I only have to do 1 day a week to see gains. And I'm like, bro, like, just because it worked for Mike Menzer doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
You're literally not as neurally competent as him. Therefore, you can't do it. And that's what a lot of people like get wrong, in my opinion, especially like modern day. They're trying to be like hip and cool and like only do that once a week. And the reality is it's just not gonna be enough work capacity for most people. It's just not enough volume.
Yeah,
You do just
I
need more.
definitely I like oscillating stuff too. One thing I really realized later on is that in the beginning, everything's very linear in the sense of like I'm gonna push up my deadlift as high as I can, as fast as possible, and I want to always be getting stronger. But later on, when I started getting to an injury loop, what I realized is like what would make more sense is something along the lines of like maybe for this 3 month block, I'm going to push deadlift hard. I'm going to do something crazy and I'm going to let everything else go on the back burner to just let deadlift be in the spotlight. And then after that, move on. Don't try to put deadlift in the spotlight for a year, put it in the spotlight for 3 months. And then take another 3 months where you kind of put deadlift more on maintenance, keep the gains you got from it, and then squat a little more. And kind of have the seasonality to it to where like for me, benching 3 times per week was the best, but I couldn't do that longer for 6 or 12 weeks. Otherwise, overuse injuries would start to crop up and I'd kill the long-term potential. But that seasonality approach of like, and also just experimentation by taking things with seasonality, you get to experiment with different training styles to where like maybe try a round of the Mike Menser. Does it work? I don't know. Maybe let's see. Or maybe try the high volume approach. And like, I don't know, what does it work? I don't know. Let's see. Do you like it? Like, is it fun? If it gets you excited to come to the gym, that counts for something. And then from there, because a lot of guys are like, tell me the best thing, or they'll argue about all the different methods that different people propose. And it's like, yeah, but you don't know how your body's going to respond to any of those things. So it doesn't matter who has the more logically sound argument. Go try it. We got plenty of time to experiment in the gym if you run things in 12-week phases. Like, go see. And I think a lot of people, they're afraid that they're going to miss out on gains if they experiment a little bit. But at least what I found is that through that experimentation process, everything works. And then sometimes you'll get more gains than others in certain areas. But even if you did that one style and you got a lot of gains in it in 3 months, I've come back to it and didn't get as many gains the next time.
Mhm.
Or it was just radically different to where kind of having that novelty over time seems to also be beneficial as far as progress.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things too, like my background being in like physical therapy and rehab, and then also like performance enhancement, specifically with athletes, not powerlifting or bodybuilding specific. Like that idea is massive in that world too, like rehabilitative wise and sports wise, where it's like you have to actually cycle what you're doing. Just because, again, so much of this stuff training wise is neural and people don't realize it. They think a lot of it's just like straight up how your body works, like your muscles and your legs and your arms and your limbs and your core. And it's like that's all stemming from neural stuff. So to continue to make progress, you do have to give it variations. And like that cycling is something I've always tried to do where it's like, hey, this cycle I'm focusing on strength. I'm doing like super low volume, but very heavy weights. And then another cycle, I'll do very like high volume. And then another cycle, I'll do like a power focus where I'm literally focusing on like the rate of speed at which I'm moving the bar, things like that. Or I'm just doing a straight, like heavy plyometric phase where I'm not actually doing a lot of actual weightlifting. It's more calisthenics. So like I've always tried to do 12-week cycles where I'm rotating in the main methodology. And that's always worked well for me. Honestly, from a longevity perspective, like knock on wood,
Mhm.
I've never had any serious injury from lifting, or honestly, any serious non-contact injury in sports. Like the worst thing I've had was when I was playing soccer, I had like a hairline fracture in my foot, but that's like the extent of it. Anything else was like I was out for like a month with my leg recently in jujitsu, but it's because I literally had somebody fall on my leg. Like that was a contact injury. It was nothing that training could have prevented. So I think that methodology works really well from a longevity perspective. And I think the other side of
Mhm.
it, the reason it's good for longevity is what you're talking about. Like psychologically, if it makes you excited to keep training, I think it's worth it. And it's worth rotating because it stays fresh. A lot of people get burnt out because they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And you're in coaching too. So you get this. Sometimes a client will churn because they're just bored, or they'll stop
Yeah.
doing workouts
Oh
because
yeah.
they're bored. They're bored. And so they
Yeah.
stop going to the gym or they stop working with you because they're bored. So you have to like keep it fresh and keep it exciting for them, or else they get complacent and either stop going to the gym or they stop working with you, go somewhere else and find somebody else that will switch it up for them and will keep it fresh and will keep it
Yeah.
fun. So there's a
I've
mix,
got I
and there's like it's psychological and physical.
yeah. I've got a little like piece to add to that. So one thing I learned when I started having hybrid athlete do my programming is the idea of, and uses this terminology, low hanging fruit to where you go do some kind of stimulus that's novel to you, and the adaptations are beginner gains. And because one thing I realized, it took me a long time to realize, is that beginner gains isn't just like this phenomena of you've exercised for 2 years and then now it's over. Beginner gains really means if you do something new that you haven't done before, you adapt to it rapidly. So if you took a guy that trained for 2 years and all he trained was legs, let's say he came in and like not even like barbell squats or anything like that, like just straight up leg extension, leg curl, and that's the only thing he trained. If 2 years in he started to train biceps, he would get the same effect of beginner gains on biceps that he would have got had he started in the beginning. You don't run out of beginner gains. It's just novel stimulus. So Hybrid started giving me plyometrics, and I'd never done plyometrics before. I mean, I've done athletic events, but I haven't done plyometric training. And all of a sudden I was getting crazy stimulus, and I was like, this is awesome. And then the adaptations came and I was like, this is cool. And then he gave me some other stuff around mobility. So I got all these new beginner gains because I just never worked on these pockets of skills before, because before it was all about strength. And I really enjoyed that. And I was also in a calorie deficit at the time. So one, I wasn't going to hit numbers I used to hit in strength anyways, but now I was in a calorie deficit. It was all going to be slower regardless. Um, but I was still getting the beginner gains here because, when you're in a calorie deficit, if you're a noob, you still get pretty good gains because you're a noob. So what I've started applying to clients is, I had like one guy recently that he's in the squat, bench, and deadlift. He wants to be stronger on squat, bench, and deadlift, and he's running a cut. So I had him doing that, and he kind of started to feel fatigued and beat up a little bit. And I was like, hey, why don't we change this a little bit so that we don't accumulate as much fatigue in the gym, and let's work on some stuff that you haven't done before but you need, because his mobility is not very good and he wants to work on that. So I basically started giving him some of the main three variations that give you more mobility, or it takes more mobility to be able to pull them off. So like doing a Zercher hold Cossack squat, and or like I gave him some front squats because he'd never done those before. And so just different stuff that he's never done that I know just from technical proficiency, he would gain strength on it, but he'll probably adapt to it too because it's just new stimulus to him. And I've also got him doing some plyometrics that he hasn't done before. That's new to him. So all of a sudden, he wiped out the fatigue that he was accumulating from squatting and benching and deadlifting heavy. And now he's getting these beginner gains on stuff that he didn't even know he could adapt in. He didn't even know it was physically possible to adapt in these ways. And he's cranking out the calorie deficit, and he's like, I love it. And it's so funny because as soon as he gets done with the debt, paying off his debt, his calorie debt, and he's back to maintenance, if he wants to go back to squat, bench, and deadlift, he'll get back to his numbers almost immediately. And he's likely to be even better than before because now he's got a more rounded out, well-developed physique, or physical capabilities that he didn't have before. So anyways, I don't know why I got on that tangent, but that's something I've been working on lately, like with clients, is like, what's the low-hanging fruit that I can have them adapt in while they're in a calorie deficit that also doesn't accumulate much fatigue, so they feel like they're really winning in the gym, even while they're losing fat on the scale. But if we try to grind out, like they've been lifting for a long time, we're just trying to grind on lifting while they're in a calorie deficit, you're going to be like, this sucks. My numbers are going down. As I lose my bench press is going down. It's not fun. But by just redirecting them to new things, it gives them new stuff to work on, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's a misconception. A lot of people think calorie deficit equals like no gains. But when somebody's so new and it's all brand new stimulus to them, like I was literally just putting out a video about this before we started talking, where you can absolutely gain muscle and like make gains in strength and muscle while in a deficit if you are new, especially if
Yeah.
it's new movement patterns. So even if you take a guy that's not new, like you're saying, for example, let's say you take a guy that's been doing like a powerlifting style where he's just been heavily focused on squats, bench, deadlift, not really much accessory work. That's all he's ever done. If you take him and you transition him to more like hypertrophy focused, like in a deficit, that guy who's actually experienced in training, he'll still make good newbie gains in those new movement patterns, like you're saying, because it's just new stimulus. So even though training's not new to him, the new stimulus, he can still make gains in that. And so it's not only just like, do you have no training background at all? It's like, what is your training background? And as long as there's new stimulus, the chances are, even in a deficit, you're going to make strength and muscle gains through those new ranges of motion. And people don't realize that. They think calorie deficit equals like L for performance. And I think the safe generalization is like, yeah, usually, but there's nuance there. And the nuance is like the stimulus side of it is like
Yeah.
what actual stimulus that they're giving them. And so people get confused on that. And like, I always have to explain it in a coaching capacity. It's like the generalization of does a calorie deficit make your performance worse? It is true. Like in general, if we were optimizing for performance, we would want you at maintenance or even maybe a slight surplus. But that's just in general. Like it's just what's most optimal. But it doesn't mean that it can't happen. It doesn't mean that you can't make gains. It doesn't mean that you can't make strength. It's just maybe not optimal, but it's certainly still possible. And when people think it's impossible, that's when it's a problem.
Yeah. There is one hard limit that I tend to see a little bit more. Not always. It depends on the person, but uh, it's hard to increase your capacity when you're in a calorie
Yeah.
deficit. So if a guy is like to use just like simplicity, if a guy's used to doing 40 lifting sets per week, it's unlikely that I can get him from 40 to 80 lifting sets per week, progression, 5 sets a week without it messing him up. If he's in a calorie deficit. But with those 40 sets, if he's used to 40 sets, we can do weird and new stuff inside of the 40 sets and it's be okay. But it's hard to ramp that up. Same thing with like running mileage. If a dude is used to running 5 miles a week, while he's in a calorie deficit, it's going to be really hard to get him to 30 miles a week, no matter how slow you increase that. Whereas in a maintenance and surplus, you can kind of ratchet up at 10% a week or something like that. That'll be kind of okay. But it's hard to increase capacity. It can happen sometimes. And especially if you're clever about it. But yeah, that's something I've noticed more as a hard limit. And that's also too why I've tried to take more of an approach of when guys are in a calorie deficit, not trying to work them too hard across many fronts. And that's one of the cool things about low hanging fruit is if something's truly new stimulus to you, I can give you 2 sets a week of that and you still get stupid gains from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to give you 10. I just
For,
give you 2.
for
So
sure.
that's been like, but yeah, I've been trying to, this is all part of my like meditations on how can I get people to be really excited about their training, even when they're in a calorie deficit. And also too, a lot of these guys, like they've got 250,000 calories to pay down. It's about to take them 2 years to do it. So it's not a short, negligible span of time in a calorie deficit. That's a long time. I mean, there might be maintenance phases in between, and obviously they're going to have some surplus days on Thanksgiving and crap like that, but it's still most of the time calorie deficit.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And like I learned the lesson with like capacity with athletes specifically because like one of the ways that we would mitigate any fatigue or exhaustion for athletes in season when it was performance enhancement, whether it was college athletes or professional athletes, it would always just be like massively reducing volume but maintaining intensity. So they would still come in and they would still squat 405 or whatever
Yeah.
80 to 95% of their one rep max. They would still do it, but instead of doing it for 5 sets, they do it for 1 or 2 sets. And so you just like cut the volume in half, but you make sure the stimulus from an intensity perspective is still where it needs to be. And that's how you can actually make sure somebody maintains the progress they've made without jeopardizing them for injuries or things like that. When, I mean, these are guys that are making millions of dollars. If they get hurt, they're screwed. Right. So like you have to make sure that they don't get injured, but they also stay up to par for performance. And that's where I learned the work capacity lessons that I learned. But on the topic of calorie deficits and stuff, and I know we only have like 15 minutes left. I wanted to actually ask you, because I think we've talked about it a little bit in person, but I can't remember how the conversation went, how you came up with calorie lag. Like, how did you come up with that idea? Because obviously both
Yeah.
I hammer that with clients now ever since we talked about it. And it's something I intuitively always knew, but I just didn't know how to put it into terms. And you put it into terms of calorie lag. And as soon as you did, it was one of those coaching moments for me. I was like, oh, bro, that's so good. That's such an easy way to explain it to people. So I think
Yeah.
the best way for you to intro this is just like explain what calorie lag is. And then how did you actually come up with the idea of that?
Yeah. It was kind of like multiple things were brewing at the same time. But really what started it was, and before this, I never really had, when I was thinking about losing weight, I would think about what the calorie input number had to be. And I knew calorie output mattered, but I didn't really deal with it too much. And I decided I want to start trying to track it specifically. And as soon as I did, it became apparent to me that calorie output was a huge needle mover and no one pays enough attention to it. So and really it started with like the suspicion of sometimes like like I've noticed a lot of clients have their lazy Sunday where they literally don't step outside and touch grass and they walk less than half a mile that day because they just stay inside all day and
Yeah.
like watch sports or whatever they do, like, taking care of the kids, like
I kind of do
maybe
that on
their kids,
Sunday. Give me some slack.
like their kids don't like to go outside either. I don't know, but like they're not doing nothing. And I was like, I bet because most time in normal life when they eat, let's say 2,300 calories, it might be towards maintenance, might be a deficit. But I was like, I bet on those Sundays, I bet 2,300 is a fat surplus. And they don't even know it. Because to them, the calorie input number didn't have any context of change. It was just 2,300 was like, that's a good put up for the day. They didn't think about the calorie output. So I started mapping that up and I was like, oh shoot, like um if you're really active that day, you do your lifting and you have cardio, your calorie output might be 3,000. So eating 2,300 calories is a 700 calorie deficit. But if you just sat on the couch all day, then your calorie output was 2K. So now that 2,300 was a 300 calorie surplus. And I wanted them to see that because they weren't getting it. I was like, I need you to see this. So I started mapping it up. And from there, it became more of this game of like, instead of trying to hit now this depends on the person. I go back and forth sometimes, but kind of the idea was, if you want to have some freedom to where I just need you to hit a 500 calorie deficit, I don't care how you do it. So make your calorie input and calorie output match in a way that you get a 500 calorie deficit. So if you do nothing that day, you do not get to eat a lot. If you do a lot, then you get to eat a lot, and figure it out. And so I started like messing around with that. And then, so I put together what I call the calorie output stack of how we figure out what the calorie output is. And basically your first base is mere existence calories, your basal metabolic rate. You sit on the couch all day, that's how much you burn. Most guys, like your average 5'10" guys, probably going to be the ballpark of like 1,900, something like that. And then from there, it's kind of like the activity metric. So I break them into walking, cardio, and lifting. So walking, it depends on your body weight, more you weigh, more you burn walking, but average, I'll just use the 200-pound guy or actually 180. I'll just use my number. So 180-pound guy, as example numbers. So for walking a mile, I give myself 100 calories. Every time I walk 1 mile, it's 100 calories. And then every time I lift, like just based on how I lift for an hour, I give myself 200 calories. Most people think they burn more calories lifting than they actually do. Like if you have rest periods while you're lifting, like in an hour, you might actually only have 10 to 20 minutes of meaningful work. And I'm telling you, 10 to 20 minutes of jogging is going to burn something like 200 calories, give or take. And like, I promise you, your bicep curl is not burning as many calories as jogging for
Yeah.
that minute. So I put 200,
Huge
and
misconception.
then with cardio, it's just whatever my Apple Watch says. It's got my heart rate. You can argue about how accurate or not it is. I don't really care. It's the number I'm going to use. And then from there, I do the thermic effect of food. Protein is 25%. So basically, I give myself back, like for every gram of protein I eat, I burn 1 calorie. That's how I calculate it. And then with fiber, you don't absorb all the calories. So every gram of fiber I eat it's not absorbed, but I burn 2 calories is basically the idea. So you put all that together, and my calorie output will range anywhere from, like, I start off today with 1,800 gimme calories. And then from there, I can work it. If I'm lazy, it's going to end up at like 2,100. But if I do a lot, I can get up to 3,400, 3,500 sometimes. I like when it's that high. And that's even started to turn into a goal for me of like, I want to be the kind of guy that consistently outputs 3,200 calories every day. Because if I can get that much energy out, my body's just gonna have to figure out how to be an energetic person in order to make that work and be able to recover from it. So the idea is the higher my energy output, as long as I can recover from it, the more energy I have in general. And so far that checks out. And in my experience. But anyways, I started tracking that up with clients. So then it was now, instead of our main feedback loop being, this is your weight change over time, now it was, here was yesterday's deficit. And now it was less about what the weight was doing, and it's more like, all right, if you're tracking accurate enough, which I make sure my guys track accurate enough, and we make sure calorie output's accurate enough, and I make sure my guys' calorie output is accurate enough, you can look at that and go, I did 500 calorie deficit yesterday. That's what I did. Maybe it's 400, maybe it's actually 600, but it wasn't zero and it wasn't 1,000. So, it's kind of just, we work with those numbers. And I started to map it up of like, based on the calorie deficits that we're getting, is your weight moving where we expected it to go? And with that, I started to tweak numbers to make it line up. So if this person put up I'm trying to remember the numbers, but like 3,500, calories equals 1 pound is like my assumption. So if they lose 10 pounds, did 35,000 or whatever, it's hard to do math in my head on a podcast, but
You're a
if
math guy, bro. You got it.
did their calorie deficit line up with what their body weight is doing? Because they should be the same, based on our predictions. And if they're not, then either like maybe their basal metabolic rate is a little bit different, or maybe their food tracking is not accurate. And what I found is that most of the time, it's pretty spot on. Every now and again, I got to lower someone's BMR down by 100 to 200 calories. Because especially when they've been dieting for a while, I see BMR go down when you diet for a while. And then I saw one guy one time that he had been dieting for a while and his sleep sucked ass. And we had to really drive that BMR down to make it work. But I just messed with the numbers to start making them line up. And then, so that was all brewing. And then at the same time was kind of the idea of, we're treating our fat loss like a project. And in project management, you've got a project deadline. In business, you don't have projects without a deadline. That's dumb. And in fat loss, if you don't have a deadline, that's dumb, because we need to get this thing done. Because if you've got 50, 100 pounds to lose, you're looking at a year, 2, 3 years. And if you fuck around, you'll find out that it actually might take you 8 years, and like, we don't want that.
Yeah.
So I basically started them out, and I pretty much set everybody on the same pace in the beginning. We're gonna lose a pound a week. I mean, and they'll be like, why you pick a pound a week?
Oh, you're nice. You're nice.
Because
I rip. I'm like, no, we're losing 2 pounds a week. Like, let's figure
well,
this. No room
yeah,
for
so I do a
error.
pound. So I do a pound, and I'm like, half pound's too slow. And then with 2 pounds, I just don't drive them like that. And
I drive.
I mean, you definitely can. But I just like to do a pound. And I started mapping it up, bro. So they have this chart, and it's like the calorie deficit. So if you want to lose a pound a week, you should have a 500 calorie deficit every day. So that line started coming down like that. And then you see what they actually do compared to that line.
Yeah.
And the difference between them is the idea of calorie lag. And it's basically like, are you lagging behind the deadline or not? And guys will get behind it. And then it's like, all right, bro, either you better tighten up and fix this right now, so we got some catching up to do, or we're extending the project deadline. And it's like, if you get too far behind, we're just gonna have to reset, because I'm not cool with you putting up 1,500 calorie deficits every day to try and catch up. You're not gonna do it either. If you fail to hit 500 calorie deficits every day, then making the goal 2 times harder is not going to increase probability that you actually hit the goal this time. So we're just going to reset. And so, it's kind of like, every guy's different with how you work with that and try and help him. But the whole point was, you want to get this off, then this is how long it's going to take. And are you actually on that path or not? And everyone, all my clients, I asked them like a couple months ago, I was like, out of all the metrics that we calculate, which one's your favorite? And I got all the response back: calorie lag, calorie lag, calorie lag. And I was like, why is this your favorite? Like, I was like, I get it, I love it too, but like, why is this one your favorite? And they're like, because it put into perspective how I was doing, with respect to the goal I set. And really what it does is, calorie lag is the best way to put a sense of urgency into your weight loss, because it keeps it all in a perspective of how long is it going to take to get to the end. Yeah. And because it's like, if you're off on your calorie lag, then I can look at you and go, based on what you've done so far in our last 2 months, it's going to take you twice the amount of time to get this thing done. So you're actually going to be dieting for 4 years. Do you want to diet for 4 years? And they're like, hell no. And I'm like, okay, so stop finishing your kids' food when they're done. If you're one of those, like, you really just trying to save food, then put it in the fridge and eat it tomorrow. But you're out of calories today, bro. You don't get to eat that
save
today.
it for tomorrow, bro.
Don't eat it. Eat it tomorrow. If you just don't want to waste food, that just means it just can't go bad. It doesn't mean you have to eat it right now. I'm like, or you just want to eat some extra food. And they're like,
They're like, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just want some more dopamine, brother. I just want some dopamine.
So it's cool. But I do like one of the things I do like about the calorie lag is, like, it does make it easier to allow your calorie input goals to vary. So if you're going to be lazy that day, you know, obviously you don't get to eat a whole lot, but if you go and do a 10-mile hike with 3,000 feet of elevation, then you can eat, you know, whatever numbers turn out to be, but 3,400 calories and still be in a 600 calorie deficit for the day. And it's like, fuck, that's awesome. So it kind of turned into one of those things of like, if you want to eat a lot while you're in a deficit, go earn your food.
Yeah.
Like, like if, you know, for most people, let's say you diet around 2,000 calories, like it's cool if you want to go eat 3,000 calories, but you need the output to match that, or else you're going to lose 3 days of progress. So, like, just make it work.
Yeah, and that's like what I tell people too. It's like you can eat more. Like if you want to eat more, you just have to make sure the output's there. So it's like it's not like you don't like yes, move more, eat less. And like I always err on the side of just eat less. Obviously, in my mind, that's the simpler part of the equation. But there's some guys that just genuinely they're like, dude, like I'm so hungry, I need to eat more. I'm like, cool, that's fine. If you want me to bump your calories by 250 to 500, that's fine. But we just need to match it via output. So I'm like, you got a few options: walk 2.5 to 5 miles a day, go pick up an active hobby, find something to match the output. That way you can consume more food if that's a must for you. So the only time I ever like hammer guys on output is if they just literally can't control their input. Like if they can't
Yeah.
control how much they're consuming, it's like, all right, bro, well, this didn't work. So let's ramp the output. But dude, I know you and I both have to go. So we'll wrap it here because I know we could get into this part of the conversation for another like 45 minutes. This is why every time we go get ice cream together, we're there for 2 hours. So
Yeah.
yeah, we get to hammer it, but I plan on continuing to do this for a long time. So I'm sure you're gonna be back on it. But yeah, dude, thank you
That
for being
sounds good.
here. You want to just drop? We didn't even like intro you ever. You want to just drop your name and your handles at the very end here?
Uh, yeah, yeah. It's just my X account for now. We'll get on all the interwebs later, but my account handle's M Peyton Cox, and that's
Michael
PEYTON.
Peyton Cox, baby.
Just
MPC.
M, yeah, M Peyton Cox. Yeah.
MPC, baby. Thanks.